For our next topic, I'm going to step outside just a bit the actual title of the task itself, which is to recover DFS databases. In part because the recovery of a DFS database, in this version with Windows Server 2012 R2, is pretty much the same thing that we talked about just a second ago with that cloning process. Anytime you end up with a corrupted DFS database, there used to be an old non-authoritative recovery process that you would go through that could take a pretty extended period of time to get that database back online. But with this new clone operation, anytime you find yourself with a corrupted DFS database, the easiest solution is to simply clone the database from an existing good copy over to the server where the database has been corrupted. Now, this process needn't necessarily involve that long copy of the pre-seed content, so you can skip that step. But prior to actually recovering the database, it can be a good idea for you to remove any memberships of that problem server to prevent DFSR from attempting to rebuild the database until your clone process is complete. The long and short of it is in order to get that server back online, you just really repeat the process we talked about just in that last clip. However, in addition to the database itself, there is another recovery activity that I think is important for you to know, in part because we talked about it, and also because it's entirely feasible that this could happen in a production environment. Let's imagine, for example, that due to one reason or another, you end up with an environment where your two servers that are participating in the different replication group that you've created have, for some reason or another, stopped. Perhaps you've actually run this command here to suspend the replication on the replication group. This command, suspend DFS replication group, gives you a period of time in which you can actually shut down replication between two different locations. So if I go here and run this, and then run the second one that reverses things from one server to the other and vice versa, this actually shuts down replication between my two servers, file 1 and file 2, for a period of 5 minutes. Let's assume then that during that period of time when you were perhaps unaware DFS was not appropriately replicating, that some user just went into the usual company shared location and they were going through the articles and they found an article down here where user 1 on file 1 changed the name of an article here from moving the control plane to moving the control plan. And then back over here on our server file 2, some other user in another location entirely happened to go into the same file in the same folder in the same replicated share and inadvertently changed it then not to the control plan, but to the control pane. This ends up creating what is essentially a conflict here within our DFS infrastructure because I now have two different changes that have occurred during the period when that replication was suspended. And so it can actually create some problems here for DFS because DFS probably isn't aware of exactly which of these is the authoritative copy. And arguably, they both are at the same time. Well, every so often when you end up with these situations, there are a couple of just different tools you can use, specifically two different PowerShell commands that you should be aware of, and then also one location that can exist on your DFSR-enabled servers. Let me bring up here a little PowerShell ISE window where I can show you these two commands that I've already kind of tooled around with here in order to get this demonstration up and running. The first command is get DFSR preserved files, which will identify a path for a specific XML file that once DFSR comes back online, this XML file will contain the information about the conflict. If I then execute this file after the 5 minutes has elapsed and we're no longer suspending replication, well, then I can pop up here, execute the command here, and get more information about which different files may be in conflict. Now, obviously, for this to occur, you might need to monitor this file. There are a couple of files in addition, some XML files that exist in that DFSR private subfolder that is the folder underneath the shared folder that we created. In that location, these XML files can provide information about exactly what files are in conflict and for what reason, perhaps a file delete or an update conflict, which is the actual conflict itself. In order for you to be able to recover them, thankfully Microsoft also provides an accompanying command called restore DFSR preserved files, which includes 3 or 4 useful parameters for restoring the files to its original location, for restoring it to a separate path, for also copying the files as opposed to moving them from their existing location. If you wanted to, you could then run this file here to actually recover the deleted files and put them back in their appropriate location. Now, one thing I do want to show you here is if I bring up another PowerShell window, I just want to show you exactly what we're taking a look at here as it relates to that DFSR private location that we were working with. Let me go here to our company shared location where I can show you here that we have both the articles and the JSON's stuff folders that are visible here within this location. But if I do a CD over here to that DFSR private subfolder, that'll actually let me get into this subfolder. And one of the great things about using PowerShell here is that, very different from trying to do this through Explorer, this is a location where you can dig into this folder without having to modify the permissions all that much. So it's from within this folder where we can take a look at these two XML files, the conflict and deleted manifest XML file that I just referenced a second ago, as well as a pre-existing manifest, which is another of these XML files that DFSR uses to identify when files are in conflict. In cooperation with these two XML files, we have a variety of different directories here as well. These folders here contain copies of the files that are in conflict for one reason or another. There's the staging folder that we talked about earlier in this module, that temporary location where files can go while they're transferred from one server to another. There's the pre-existing folder, which corresponds with the pre-existing manifest, and the conflict and deleted folder, which corresponds with the conflict and deleted manifest. Now, right now, there aren't going to be any files in that folder because we already executed the restore command, so there's nothing in there to actually view. But what I can show you is that because we've gone through and now run that restore command, that we will now see what is essentially file 2's representation of the conflicted file as being the authoritative one, and that file now existing both here on file 2 as well as over on file 1. That happens because replication is now once again begun. You can see here that on this machine, moving the control pane is the current version. That's the version we changed over here on file 2. And if I go back over to file 1 and then refresh things, you'll see that moving the control pane has been replicated over to this server from file 2. So this recovery process gives you a bit more control or accessibility towards fixing some of those issues that may occur when DFS, for one reason or another, is not replicating things fast enough to support the changes that are occurring.